Hello everyone, it's Seriously, and welcome to the channel. Today we will be discussing the events of April 25th and 26th, 1986 that resulted in what we now know as the Chernobyl nuclear disaster. I apologize in advance if any pronunciations of names are slightly off. I try to get them as closely as possible. Also, I am not a nuclear physicist, so all the information I gathered for this video is from research I have done on the internet and through books on Chernobyl. Now let's get into today's video. In the early morning hours of April 26, 1986, an explosion occurred at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant after unfavorable conditions and human error brought about one of the world's worst nuclear disasters while trying to conduct a simple safety test that had been unsuccessful 3 previous times. While the actual explosion did not occur until 1:23 a.m. on April 26, the circumstances that brought about the disaster began almost a full day earlier in the early morning hours of April 25, 1986. A little background into the design of the reactors used at Chernobyl will help in understanding why this safety test was being conducted. Inside a nuclear reactor, heat is generated primarily through nuclear fission, while some comes through the decay of the radioactive material. This heat will continue to be produced even if the reactor is shut down. In order to prevent the nuclear core from overheating or even causing a meltdown, coolants have to constantly be applied to the core. In the RBMK reactors used at Chernobyl, that coolant is water which is circulated throughout the site by electrical pumps. In the event of a massive power loss, all reactors at Chernobyl were equipped with 3 backup diesel generators to keep the coolant circulating to the core. However, it would have taken around 60 to 75 seconds for the generators to produce the output of power needed to run one of the main pumps. A theory was brought forth that it was possible to use the energy produced by the momentum of the recently shut down steam turbine to generate the power necessary to operate the emergency cooling system. Previous analysis of this theory speculated that the energy pulled from the slowing turbine would allow for the emergency cooling system to operate an additional 45 seconds after the shutdown. This greatly reduced the time between the initial shutdown and the 60 to 75 seconds needed for the backup generators to get the pumps working again. As good as a theory is, it still needed to be tested before it could be implemented, and as stated before, the safety test has been unsuccessful 3 times before. The test was designed to take place during a controlled power down to simulate a power loss. 4 of the 8 pumps would be powered by off-site electricity, while the remaining 4 pumps would be powered by the electricity produced by the turbine. When adequate conditions were met, the reactor's steam supply would be closed and an automatic shutdown would be triggered. The voltage generated by the turbine would be measured as well as the power produced by the 4 pumps powered by the turbine. Around 1 in the morning on April 25th, Reactor 4 was reduced to 50% power in order to begin setting up the proper conditions for the safety test that should have been conducted later that day. At around 2 p.m., the emergency cooling system was disconnected to further prepare for the test that was planned to take place under the watch of the experienced day shift workers who had conducted the test the previous 3 times. This test would also be supervised by the Deputy Chief Director of Operations, Anatoly Dyatlov. However, the test was not able to be performed during the day shift because power from the reactor was needed to help power the local energy grid. Factories and businesses across Soviet Ukraine were trying to reach quotas before the upcoming holiday weekend and needed all the electricity they could get from Chernobyl. Dispatchers at Kiev's electrical grid informed that Chernobyl would not be able to go offline to conduct the test until 9 p.m. at the earliest. As the time ticked closer to midnight, another shift change occurred, and the earlier shift that had been briefed on the details of the test were leaving for home, and the safety test still had yet to begin. The Deputy Chief Director, Dyatlov, who was supervising the test, is speculated to have been running on almost 2 full days without sleep at this point and becoming extremely irritated at the constant delays. Dyatlov knew that if the test was not conducted tonight, then it would probably be another year before it could be done again. Other electrical engineers at the plant were beginning to threaten to cancel their contracts and return home if the safety test didn't start soon. An on-site physicist from the plant's nuclear safety department, who was expected to be on hand for the test, was told the test had already been completed, so he hadn't shown up that day at all. With another shift change completed, Leonid Topchinov, a man who had only been in his position for 2 months, would be guiding the reactor through a shutdown for the very first time. As soon as Kiev's dispatcher gave the okay, the three operators in the control room resumed the reactor's power descent and held the reactor steady at 720 megawatts. Dyatlov speculated it would be safer if the test was conducted at a lower voltage, so he ordered the operators to lower the output to 200 megawatts. Akimov, an experienced reactor control engineer, adamantly objected to this notion enough for others in the control room to note the argument between Dyatlov and Akimov. Akimov knew that the reactor could become unstable and harder to maintain at 200 megawatts, but Dyatlov would not change his mind, so Akimov gave the order to reduce the output further. The first mistake made by operators happened 28 minutes after midnight. When Topchinov assumed responsibility of the control panel that morning, he did not choose the level of power the computerized regulation system should have maintained during the test, and the computer defaulted to the last set point it was given, 0 megawatts. The reactimeter, which showed the thermal output of the reactor in megawatts, began to drop rapidly. Alarms began to sound, and within 2 minutes the power output of Reactor 4 had dropped to just 30 megawatts. By 12:30 a.m., the number was almost zero, and for another 6 minutes Topchinov did not take any actions. In this time, xenon gas began to build in the core, poisoning the reactor and causing the reactor's power to stall, in turn producing even more xenon gas. At this point, safety procedures dictated that the test should have been aborted and the reactor should have been shut down immediately, but it wasn't. After this point, there are conflicting accounts of what actually happened in the control room. Dyatlov claims he wasn't in the room when the power fell, but couldn't come up with a reason as to why he had left and did not give instructions after things went bad. Others present at this time gave a different account. Topchinov claims that Dyatlov not only was in the room when the power fell, but gave the orders to retract more control rods from the reactor to increase the power. Topchinov then refused Dyatlov's order, who in turn began to threaten him with the loss of his job and his career. After a few minutes of arguing, Topchinov gave in to Dyatlov's orders, and another shift's head, Yuri Tregub, stepped in to help Topchinov. Over the next 20 minutes, Topchinov and Tregub were able to bring the reactor back up to 200 megawatts, but couldn't go further. The buildup of xenon gas was killing the positive neutrons in the core, and the two were almost out of control rods to extract. By 1 a.m., the two had managed to stop an accidental shutdown, but did so by having to extract 203 of the unit's 211 control rods from the core. However, due to the power output reaching 200 megawatts again, 2 more of the giant circulation pumps came back online, driving more cooling water into the core, further upsetting the balance of reactivity, water pressure, and steam content. Boris Stolyarchuk, who was in control of the pump systems, struggled to correct the water levels in the steam separator drums. The time had come for the safety test to begin, and all 10 men in the room stood nervously around their instruments on the control panels. And at 1:22 a.m., Dyatlov gave the order for the test to begin, and the design basis accident button was pressed. Akimov watched the tachometer as it measured the speed of turbine number 8, and the 4 circulation pumps began to slow down. While a deadly reaction was taking place inside the core, Topchinov's control panel showed nothing unusual. For another 20 seconds, the reactor's readings remained in their normal limits. Turbine number 8 slowed to 2,300 revolutions per minute, and the test could come to an end. Akimov began shutting down the reactor by pressing the AZ5 button, and 36 seconds after it began, the safety test was over and the control rods began their slow descent back into the reactor. The events that happened next took place so fast that the recording capacity of the reactor's instruments were not able to document them. In a second, the boron carbide-filled rods began to enter the top of the reactor and reactivity fell as it was designed to do. But the graphite tips of those rods began to displace the water at the bottom of the core, generating steam and more reactivity. After 2 seconds, the chain reaction began to increase at an unstoppable speed, spreading throughout the core. The control panel suddenly lit up with alarms notifying everyone in the control room of a power surge. Akimov yelled again to shut down the reactor, and Yuri Tregub heard what he thought at the time was turbine number 8 begin to decelerate. But then it began to roar, and the building started to vibrate. Yuri thought it was a side effect of the test. Within the next 3 seconds, Thermal power leapt to over 100 times maximum, and the fuel channels leading to the core began to overheat. The temperature climbed to over 3,000 degrees Celsius, or almost 5,500 degrees Fahrenheit, causing the assemblies to explode, dispersing metal and uranium dioxide into the channels, immediately turning the water into steam. The control rods jammed at their halfway points, and all 8 emergency steam release valves snapped and disintegrated. Inside the central hall, Valery Perevodchenko watched as the fuel channels caps began jumping up and down. The walls of the control room started to shake, and from his post, Boris Stolyarchuk said he heard a rising moan, like the protest of a giant beast in anguish. Then there was a loud bang. As the fuel channels failed and the water circulation stopped entirely, the check valves of the circulation pumps closed, and all the water remaining in the core flashed into steam. A neutron pulse surged through the dying reactor, and thermal power peaked at more than 12 billion watts. The steam pressure inside the sealed reactor space rose rapidly, heaving Elena, the 2,000-ton concrete and steel upper shield, clear off its mountings. The temperature inside the reactor rose to almost 4,650 degrees Celsius, or 8,400 degrees Fahrenheit, almost as hot as the surface of the sun. Another tremendous roar sounded, speculated to have been caused as the mixture of hydrogen and oxygen inside the reactor space suddenly ignited. The entire building shook as reactor number 4 blew itself apart in an explosion equivalent to as much as 60 tons of TNT. This explosion tore apart the hundreds of water and steam pipes and tossed the shield into the air like a flipped coin. It blew away the 350-ton refueling machine, ripped the bridge crane from its rails overhead, demolished the upper walls of the reactor halls, and smashed through the concrete roof, leaving the hall open to the sky above. In that moment, almost 7 tons of uranium fuel along with control rods, channels, and graphite blocks were pulverized and launched into the surrounding air, exposing the air to a mixture of some of the most dangerous substances known to man. Around 25 to 30 tons of uranium and graphite were launched out of the reactor and scattered around Unit 4. As stated at the beginning of this video, this incident became one of the worst nuclear disasters in history. The aftermath of the explosion and the cleanup of Reactor Building 4 has enough information to make a video for itself, which I will be doing in the future. If you have any other topics you would like me to research and make videos about, just leave your suggestions in the comments. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you will come back for more.